Welcome to Conversations. My name is Amy Adams. I'm the editor of Conscious Life Space and the broadcaster of this podcast. Welcome to Conversations, Episode 3. Today joining me is Amber Gourley, the Disobedient Dietitian. In today's episode, we discuss looking outside the gut, food sensitivities and food as a trigger for inflammation, cooking from scratch, and the importance of a whole food diet, and much more. Before we get started, I just have one quick announcement. Did you know that Conscious Life Space offers a free course, 7 days towards gratitude? You don't even have to sign up on the mailing list. That's crazy. Everyone makes you sign up on the mailing list, but not for this. It's a free course, free forever, given from me to you from the bottom of my heart. That's my way of expressing my gratitude to you for being here. Now let's get started. Welcome, and thank you for joining me today on Conversations.
Thanks for having me, Amy.
So I'd like you to just introduce yourself momentarily and let people know where you're from and how long you've been doing this and what drove you to become the disobedient dietitian.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am over here in Northeast Tennessee. If you look at the state, we're the very tip. That's where I'm located. And as you mentioned, I am a dietitian. I have a master's in nutrition, as well as being a certified lead therapist and a certified diabetes educator. I've been studying nutrition for over 10 years, practicing for about 5.
And how did you come up with your name for the disobedient dietitian? Because I just love it. I think it's so clever, and it I would want to call you and be like, okay, I need help. I would pick you first because I like this kind of rebellious. I love that. I just love it. I think it's wonderful.
So, really great question. Of course, my husband actually came up with the name. I was brainstorming. I'd had a pretty ho-hum business name before, and I was looking to change and do some new branding. And we're sitting actually in this kitchen and chatting back and forth. He's like, "Well, you're not a normal dietitian. Like, when people think of dietitians, they think of meal plans in the hospital and maybe even my plate and USDA guidelines." And he's like, "You don't operate that way. You look at everyone very uniquely and individually, and you don't follow those set rules." And he's right, because, well, number one, rules are made to be broken. And two, the rules don't work for everyone, right? You can't take a standard government guideline and apply that to 1 million plus people. Our bodies just don't work that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's really great too, because we are all unique and we all have different things. We have different heritages too, with gene sets and everything. So this is something that's really interesting. I really love it. Now you have a website, and you can pretty much now, with the way that the world is going, you can offer your services online, right? I mean, do you work with some people that are outside of your immediate area?
Well, it's a good question. And I do offer virtual services. It really depends on where they're located. So as far as borders, lines, licensure laws, I have worked with clients all across the world. It just, like I said, it really depends on their unique situation. I'm always happy to talk to someone. 30 minutes of my time, absolutely free. And if for whatever reason, whether it be legalities, whether it be service-based, maybe they can't do some of the labs and stuff we'd like to do, I always am happy to help people find a really good provider that might be a better fit. So, I always welcome the conversation, but I'm also very cognizant of lots of the other things that go into working virtually as well.
Right. So you also have a Facebook group too, though, where you offer advice and you have discussion amongst people, right, with their different kinds of problems that they face. And I also noticed that you had posted some recipes and things too, which is really great. And I actually had to laugh because you had mentioned in one of the recipes about Brussels sprouts and or one of the articles maybe about people not liking certain things. Now, I don't like green vegetables in general. I mean, that's just my own personal little weird quirk. I like all the other colored vegetables, but I think that's really interesting. And I think it's great that you're offering alternatives to people of ways that they can do different things. But now what is it that you said that you think that sometimes people, why do you think that, that maybe they think they don't like something, but they do?
Yes. So I actually taught, yes, it totally makes sense. Totally makes sense. I taught cooking classes for quite a number of years actually. And so this isn't just, you know, a thought, this is definitely something that I've proven. In America, the art of cooking is becoming lost, right? We don't have home ec classes anymore. Our parents, you know, I'm the latchkey generation, right? Our parents were out working, we were having TV dinners. And then we, of course, became scared of fat. In the 90s as well. And so we started taking all of that out of our cooking. In fact, when I was in graduate school, you know, beans and cornbread are really popular in the South. And they're, you know, teaching us, you know, you don't put a little bit of fat back in there. Well, are you telling me that 1 inch cube of fat back that gives so much flavor is the worst thing we can eat? Of course not. And so we've just taken all of the joy out of food, and either we're overcooking it to death, right? Remember the gray broccoli from grade school? Of course, no one's gonna like that. Or we're throwing a steamer bag in the microwave and we're not putting any flavor on it. And so there's 1,000,001 ways to cook broccoli. Maybe you don't like it steamed. Maybe you like it in a soup. Maybe you like it roasted. And so it's really playing around with different cooking techniques and bringing some fat into our dishes, maybe bringing in a little bit of sweetness like maple syrup to really, you know, bring those tastes together and make a really good vegetable dish. And that art, I think, is just, one, becoming lost, and two, a lot of the health messages out there have been, you don't cook with those things because they're bad. And that's not necessarily the case.
Yeah, and we kind of move from like one fad to another. So one week you hear don't drink coffee, one week don't drink wine, or the next week drink a glass of wine. Then the next week no fat, or only this kind of fat, and no, yeah, it's kind of crazy. So when you had said that when people come to you, you start with something called the mediator release test. Now, what is that?
So that is something that I do often like to lead with. We hear a lot that our health starts in the gut. You've probably heard that. And that's true to an extent, but sometimes we need to step it back a little bit further and actually consider about what is outside of our gut. And what I mean by that is, what are the foods that we're consuming, you know, and of course, sleep, lifestyle, and stress. And when it comes to the foods that we're eating, it can be really hard to really identify what may be causing a reaction, whether it be a food allergy or a food sensitivity or a food intolerance. And the mediator release test is a really laser focused test that sort of hones in on food sensitivities. So we're not looking at allergies, which are the ones that we consider to be life threatening, but these are food sensitivities, the things that often may be the underlying cause of some of our issues, like joint pain or migraines or IBS, but can be really difficult to identify. And that test looks at what may be causing inflammation related to it.
So you were saying that it's the food sensitivities versus allergies, and that can actually be the cause of what we have, inflammation or other kinds of diseases, right? Like irritable bowel syndrome. That is, I mean, that's a disease, right? Okay. So, and then even like fibromyalgia or any kind of disease, it could be from food.
It could definitely be a trigger. So I definitely have worked with individuals that have IBS and fibromyalgia. Those are two really good examples. And most people that I work with through this process have a reduction in symptoms anywhere from 50 to 75% within 30 days. And literally the only thing we're changing is the foods that they're consuming. Now, that being said, for some people, there's still more work because there's a reason that food was a trigger to begin with. And so if you can sort of figure out, you know, what that trigger was, is it a compromised gut? Is it, you know, the microbiome is out of balance? is that the liver not functioning properly. So once you can go in and you calm the inflammation, then you can really, dig a little bit deeper and, hopefully stop some of those leaks and actually fix them instead of plugging them.
Do you think that if somebody starts to have some kinds of symptoms I think my question is, do you think that people wait too long sometimes to get help? And if you could address also, when they come to you and they get your help, do some people not follow up with it? I mean, I guess, so it's kind of two parts. If you want to just touch on either one of those. So.
Sure. So to answer your first question, there is definitely truth to the saying, the pain of staying the same is worse than the pain of changing. And so for many people, we may have symptoms that we can live with, and it's not worth giving up our favorite foods. That's a very real thing. There's also a lack of awareness and knowledge. Our medical community isn't necessarily the best with keeping up with the cutting edge. It can be a little slow and a little old school. And so I definitely talk to a lot of people. They're like, oh my God, like I never knew that food could really be a trigger, because no one's ever taught them or educated them. And so there's that as well, right? It's sort of a two-prong issue. And then as far as following up, I operate a little bit differently than some providers, because when I work with someone, it is a commitment. It's a commitment to their health. It's a commitment to their well-being. And I actually no longer offer one-off appointments, because I do want people to genuinely get better. And those are the people that, I want to work with, that are committed to working with me for 3 to 6 months to really get the outcomes. If I was to take someone's money for one session, to me, that's almost unethical, because there's no way that they're going to get where they want to go in one session. Mm-hmm. It is a longer journey.
I was thinking about this because when I had, quit smoking, and then I also entered menopause, and that my whole body changed. And it did seem like everything was very rapidly, and in some ways it was, but kind of looking back, things were kind of creeping up step by step. And, I was ignoring probably some of the symptoms too, because you don't really notice something sometimes until it does get bad. But and all of a sudden I seemed like, oh, I gained some weight and I had inflammation and this kind of thing. But probably it was all happening for a longer period of time. It's just that all of a sudden, when your clothes don't fit you anymore, then you notice. or you have, too many headaches, or some other kind of, or you just over, too many days where the days of not feeling well start to take over the days of feeling better. Now, do you have clients that are of all different ages that come to you, or is there more like a common or a larger group of people that come to see you?
I see women all sorts of ranges as far as age. I have worked with pediatrics and teens in the past. That's definitely an area where I would say I don't do as much work anymore. Most women are 30 to 50 probably. That seems to be sort of the sweet spot when all the crap hits the fan physically, so to speak. I am seeing a very unfortunate trend where women in their late 20s, are developing one or more autoimmune diseases, and they're young, right? And they're looking on the barrel of the next 30, 40 years thinking, I can't live this way. Mm-hmm. I do work with men. I certainly have worked with men in the past. Obviously, if you look at my website, my branding isn't very masculine focused, but I do occasionally get a guy that will call me and say, I've run out of options and came across your site. Can you help me?
So do you think when people run out of options, it's because mostly they go to a doctor and the doctors aren't really equipped to deal with the kinds of, and the reason why I'm asking you this too is because the disease fibromyalgia was something that wasn't even, I'm not even sure that it still is, but it's something, I remember some people telling me that they had it. And when I first learned about it several years ago, and it wasn't recognized by the medical community. And so here was a whole population of people that were suffering from something, and they all had the same symptoms, but they were being ignored. Or do people come to you as like a last resort, or do they come to you as an initial kind of thing, or it depends?
A little bit of both, but primarily it's a last resort. I actually have worked with many people who have even asked their doctors for referrals to a dietitian who have been refused, which really blows my mind. And of course, in all fairness, I don't think a lot of doctors really understand the breadth and scope of what I can do. That being said, our medical system is very archaic in the way that it operates. It's still very much built on the foundation of a 1900 society versus 2018. And it takes about 18 years for new research to trickle its way into medical schools and into practice. And for diseases like fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, that's a really big issue, because there are these populations of women and men as well who are having very real symptoms, yet being told it's in your head, these don't exist, it's all made up, it's all fabricated. And so, again, these are the women that come to me, and the men too, who say, like, this is not in my head. I don't need a diagnosis to go to the psychiatrist. Like, I need real help.
Yeah. And a psychiatrist, maybe talk therapy could help, but also it seems like there seems to be an epidemic too with medication. And if you go to psychiatrists, you're not even actually getting the talk therapy. You're just getting a prescription a lot of times, which is not necessarily a good direction to take, which can aggravate your body even more.
It can. And over here, at least in my area of the United States, there is actually a shortage of mental health providers. And so that's an even bigger issue, right? Because now you have a population of people that have a real issue. They're getting sent to a psychiatrist. They can't even get sent to the psychiatrist to get an evaluation. And sometimes the psychiatrist will send them back to the medical community and say, you're not mentally ill. But there's that stopgap, if you will, of these people sort of lost in no man's land because there's nowhere for them to go.
And then to even have that kind of doubt, or to not be believed, because I think people really actually, like we were saying, sometimes we ignore some of our symptoms, but we think essentially people know what's going on inside of them. They might not know what the cause is or how to fix it, but the very real pains, when you have like perpetual headaches, or you have stomach pains, or you have digestive problems, I think people are pretty self-aware. And when they do go to the doctor, I've actually read a lot about this too, and not just with the fibromyalgia, but even other things too, that even the idea of people having some parasites and things too, because we don't all have the best, cleanest water systems. And even when we do, not everybody washes their hands, and viruses spread and different things happen. It's normal that these things happen. And then, but they just say, oh, no, that, you don't have that. That doesn't exist. You live in a developed country. Well, so.
Yeah, that's actually a really great point. One of the people that came to me actually was a gentleman, was diagnosed with IBS. And I often tell people that a diagnosis is really just another symptom. IBS is a really good example of that. It's a symptom of something else going on. And he was one that had asked his GI doctor for a referral to a dietitian and was refused. Mm-hmm. And he sought me out on his own. We did some stool testing and actually did find out he had a parasite. And this particular gentleman had grown up in Florida, in the Florida waters, and the parasite that he had was a waterborne parasite. Yet he was dismissed over and over and over, and basically discharged from his GI, saying there's nothing more we can do for you. It's in your head. Yet here's the physical proof. It's not in his head.
I know that on your website you had focus on meal preparation as being important, as an important aspect of our diet, and actually taking the time to prepare food. And I love to cook. So, I live by myself. So I do, and when people come over, I like to invite people over for dinner, and then it's kind of fun to cook. But for myself, I'm a little bit lazy sometimes, but I do notice that I feel better when I take time to prepare meals during the week. Like you were saying earlier, that people aren't cooking as much, or they took fat out, and so they don't really like it. So do you think that a lot of people like to go out to eat more? Is that like something more common now, or do you think that's bad for you? I think if you ate McDonald's every day, it would probably be bad for you. But, in general, like the kind of takeout culture.
We definitely have gotten to the point where we are eating out more and more. And while that you can occasionally find some good options eating out. It's become more of what's perceived to be a convenience. I'm running late, so I'm going to stop by McDonald's. And there's a couple of issues there. One is, you're going to spend 5 to 10 minutes in the McDonald's drive-thru. You can make something at home, right? It's that mindset, mentality of marketing that it's quicker and faster. And then 2 is affordability. I hear a lot that it's just too expensive to cook at home or to cook healthy food. And again, that's really just not the case. The issue, again, is we've taken that home ec piece out of our education system. We don't teach people how to shop on a budget. We don't teach people how to cook from scratch. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to get on my soapbox here for a second, but I am all about, food stamps for low income and low, those families. I think it's a wonderful program. Here's what people don't realize. The food stamp program is built on scratch cooking. It is built on buying groceries, coming home and cooking from scratch. Mm-hmm. And when you look at it from that perspective, it is very affordable, and you can really utilize those dollars really, really well and smart. But we've taken that education piece out of our system, and that's where we're failing.
Right. So people don't even know how to do it. So they kind of get overwhelmed. I could see how that happens, actually. I mean, it's kind of interesting too, because I think, and that's been a slow and steady change. I mean, there was the home ec classes before, but even my mom, and she used to buy frozen vegetables, which was because I was a latchkey kid too. And it was easier to buy frozen vegetables. And I remember I thought, I don't like carrots, cooked carrots. I thought they were terrible because I was only having frozen bagged carrots. And then later on, I met my now former husband, but back then his grandmother used to cook all the time, and she would make the most delicious carrots. And I said, when I went there to have dinner, they said, "Oh, try the carrots." And I was like, "No, I didn't really like carrots." And then I tried them and I was like, "Oh my God, they're like so wonderful." Like but she was cooking all the time. She cooked for them every single day. And she made these delicious carrots and delicious everything, rice pudding and all kinds of different things that really were, I think kind of looking back on it too, you could eat very well and they weren't really expensive. I mean, you could buy a bag of carrots and you can make a lot of things with carrots, carrot soup and the delicious carrots. But, in my mind, it was like these frozen things. So I didn't like a lot of things, but I didn't even know how to actually prepare carrots. Just because my mom even though my mother she knew how to cook, but it was just like this kind of convenience thing. And then I think that just kind of and then the microwave came out too. So it's just kind of like the slow and steady pace where we've kind of switched over. So unless you kind of start to cook yourself and learn it, it's difficult. So do you think though, with people who don't really have a high budget too, though, are there certain foods that could give, not just low budget, but for anyone, but especially, I guess, for low budget, is there something that, because I know too, like maple syrup is kind of expensive, and I know that's a good food for you, or, there's some other kinds of foods that are more expensive. So maybe if you're on a low budget, you might not want to get them because you have a family and it seems like a luxury. Is there some kind of like a couple of foods, like superfoods, or some kinds of things that you would recommend for people to buy?
So I still am trying to figure out how I feel about the term superfoods. Okay. I have a love-hate relationship with the term, because the reality is there are some foods that are a bit more nutrient dense than others. Have some powerhouse things in them, like salmon, for example, wild caught salmon. But by focusing on those superfoods, we tend to think that 1 or 2 items is going to get us everything we need, and that's where I see the issue. And so what I recommend, or what I encourage people, is 1, always shop within your budget. So, if you can't afford organic, who cares? Okay. Buy whole foods. And if that's, conventionally grown spinach, carrots, potatoes, whatever, you're doing great. There's a lot of, I think, societal pressure on this yuppie or organic type of food. And we can feel less than, right? If we can't do that, we can let go of that. If farm-raised fish is in your budget, farm-raised fish it is.
Right.
That being said, the more color, the better. So if you could get your reds, your yellows, your purples, that's important. Most of us do well with greens. That actually tends to be one we get more often. Where many of us are lacking are in the purples and the yellows and the oranges. So incorporating, that could be purple cabbage, right? That's a super cheap item. Purple grapes can be an option. And then, of course, meat, looking for as healthy of a meat as you can afford. That could be, good quality local eggs. If you can't afford something like grass-fed beef or, salmon occasionally. Again, I do recommend wild caught and farm raised if you can afford it. But if you can't, that lean meat is still a great option. And you should not in any way feel less than for not being able to afford some of those more expensive items. How does that answer your question?
Yeah. I mean, I remember there was a Whole Foods where I used to live, and I remember there were certain things that I would buy there that I couldn't get anywhere else, but I tried not to buy regular groceries there because it was very, very expensive. I mean, just by virtue of being Whole Foods. And the label organic, it's actually kind of, I read an article recently about that too. It was basically saying, like, why is it that we're, not making healthier foods accessible? It's like a luxury item, which kind of seems crazy. But so, I mean, everybody should have access to good food. That's right. So, I mean, instead of paying, $4 for some peaches, then, just because it says organic on it. And well, then there's the whole other thing too, where some of the things aren't really organic when they say they're organic. So
this probably doesn't make me the most popular dietitian in my community because I sort of straddled the fence on this. But, organic, there's still chemicals on organic food. And a lot of people do not realize that there are chemically treated organic foods, and that may or may not be better than our conventional foods. It's really, organic's an industry, and that's what people forget. Organic is a business and an industry, and Michael Pollan has some really great views on that, and I encourage anyone that's interested to read his stuff. But obviously there are some foods that are a little bit more susceptible to soaking up some of the pesticides, like strawberries, and if that's a real concern for someone, the Dirty Dozen is a good list to look at and sort of go by. So we could talk all day about organic.
So I do have another question though, actually, because you mentioned Michael Pollan. So what about, how do you feel about genetically modified food? Because some people argue and say, well, when we cross breed certain things, that's genetically modifying things. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the modifying foods with not, crossing two things to make a new pretty flour, or combo kind of, I forget what they're called, but they're like these weird looking peaches and
hybrids. Yeah,
like something like that. That I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the corn or the fish or the things like that. So I'd love to get your feedback on that, just briefly. I mean, I know we don't have all day, but
Oh, that's a tough one. So again, my view here is going to be a little bit straddling the fence. One, I honestly don't know that we have enough research. I just don't know that we have enough research. And if you listen to both sides, it's both political, right? There's a lot of agendas involved in all of the research coming out. And so I always try to be cognizant of that. My philosophy when it comes to food and life in general, unless someone is truly sick or has a condition, is whole foods, 90-95% of the time. And, wheat, soy, corn that are those genetically modified ingredients, you're actually just not going to be eating them as much if you're focusing on, all those other wonderful things. And then, the 5 or 10% of the time that you come in contact with those, if there is some harm, it's really going to be very minimal because it's not the majority of your diet. Where my personal belief that society is having some struggle is that the wheat, soy, and corn are making up, 75% of our diet. So is it the genetic modification of those ingredients? I don't know. Is it the overconsumption of those ingredients in general? I don't know. But I do know there's an issue with the amount of those that we eat, regardless of whether they're GMO or not.
Now, what about this trend with because this came up about gluten-free?
Mm-hmm.
Is that something do you think a big deal because people are over-consuming like the corn and the flour and this kind of thing? Is that why gluten has become so popular? I mean, I never really heard of it growing up, and then in the last, I don't know, however many years now it's been a thing, but I don't, maybe I should worry about it, but I don't really know exactly what that means.
Oh, that's also a really good question. So this is also sort of a chicken and the egg, right? Which came first? Did the issues come first, and then the gluten came after? Did the gluten cause the issues? And it is also falls into that fad or trend category as well. So it tends to get really messy when you start talking about this, especially in medical communities. There is definitely more and more evidence that gluten can be inflammatory. Especially for some people that are genetically predisposed to developing certain diseases. Maybe genetically they have a predisposition to celiac. They don't have full-blown celiac, but maybe they are, beginning to have some signs and symptoms. Or I certainly have seen gluten be an issue for people with fibromyalgia. So I do truly believe that for some people there are some very real sensitivities to gluten. For everyone, probably not. It's not a blanket I don't make blanket recommendations. It's always a case by case. Let's take it out. We can always add it back in, and then we'll know for sure. You just don't know until you start playing around.
Okay, so my final question is, do you have any, like a tip or something that could, or whether it be like a book recommendation or just a dietary recommendation, any kind of tip for the listeners to help them in their quest for a healthier diet?
I do. Actually, I'm going to go a little bit broader than healthier diet and go with healthier life. And the reason for that is I see people trying to jump 5 steps ahead. They don't feel good. They've gotten to where the pain is, intolerable. They want to change, but they're trying to, they're leapfrogging into genetic testing and super expensive hormone testing. And there can be a place for that, but we need to remember that everything starts with the foundation, and our health is no different. And so focus on the foods you're eating, focus on the variety, focus on more fruits and vegetables, and don't overlook stress management and sleep. Those 3 things, when addressed, can actually make a significant change to your health. And too often I see people skipping those steps and wanting to leapfrog, and you just can't. You can't.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining me today in my podcast conversations. Yeah. I was really happy to meet you and talk with you about all of these things. I know that people are definitely going to learn so much by listening to this broadcast. So
thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining me today for episode 3 with my guest, Amber Gourley, the Disobedient Dietitian. I really enjoyed our conversation today, and I hope you did too. If you want to learn more, check out the show notes at consciouslife.guru, our Conscious Life Space website. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast feed and our YouTube channel. You can also find us on Instagram, Pinterest, and Twitter. Until next time, take care.